creating a new subscription, and then tying that subscription to an account and deploying your cloud resources that you will consume into this subscription. Right? And at the top level, you have the subscription, and then you have what's called a resource group.
Now, we certainly realize that when it comes to this topic of preparing and migrating data, you could say to blank, all right?
Is going to belong to a subscription. So regardless if your resources are web apps, database.
When it comes to AWS, because certainly this is a relevant topic for AWS RDS, it's a relevant topic for AWS DynamoDB, it's a valid topic for AWS Elasticache. So, you know, it really is this concept of one of the things that we are needing to become very, very great with, no matter the particular database technology that we're utilizing. But with that said, I think it is worth noting that things become really critical in this area when you're talking about data warehousing, because you are talking about massive amounts of data typically, and that's going to present all kinds of challenges when it comes to preparation and migration, and primarily, of course, that's around can you get bandwidth and can you get optimal technologies used so that things don't take weeks and weeks and weeks to complete. So that's just one aspect of what we're going to be talking about in this section, of course. So let's detail exactly what we're going to be getting into in this module. I'm going to start out by just walking you through some overall strategies for data migration. This is going to be centered around a great set of tools that we have at our disposal in AWS. We'll then look at how you would actually execute and then, very important, validate the migrations that you've done to ensure they're accurate. And then we'll discuss the migration of on-prem to the cloud, as well as the important backup and restore strategies to make sure that while we are making, disaster recovery and high availability a possibility, we want to make sure that we don't cause, the unfreshness of data, that we don't have operational difficulties when trying to do a restore, and all those important topics. Now, Carved Rock Fitness is certainly interested in this module because they are considering the native tools in order to do much of their import. They're thinking about S3 as a source for the raw data that they want to bring in to Redshift. And they're also wanting to look at the database migration services in this area, as well as the AWS schema conversion tool. Fortunately, these are all things that we are going to be discussing in depth in this module. So we have established that data migration is probably going to be a bigger deal, more critical for your enterprise when it comes to Redshift than with any other database that you are working with inside of your organization. And I've got great news for you. There are plenty of options for tools and techniques that we're going to use in order to get this done. And we begin at the most logical starting point, and that is your native tools. I've been using the copy command for decades. I'm sure many of you listening to my voice have as well. It is the way to go. Isn't that surprising too? Like you think, oh, well, certainly we're not going to be, using the age-old copy command with this sophisticated AWS Redshift database and data warehouse, but we are. I mean, there really is no more efficient way to take data and insert it into tables that are in your Redshift infrastructure. And this isn't me talking, this is AWS. So I don't want you to think this is just like some Anthony opinion thing. They clearly state it's the way to go. And the reason that it's the way to go is that it can take advantage of that massive parallel processing, that MPP that we love so much. When we did a demonstration in the previous module of a copy, we kept it super simple. We didn't use a lot of options. It was a half a gig of data, and it went through in seconds. That was certainly impressive. But if we were dealing with gigs upon gigs of data, we would have options with the copy command that would allow us to take advantage of the massively parallel processing infrastructure. Also, what's great about the copy command is that it is going to work with a ton of different sources. We did a demonstration with AWS S3, but keep in mind that it could be all kinds of sources that this copy command can work from. So, really, really consider that tool. Now, another option that we have, which is standard here with SQL, is our data manipulation language options. So maybe you need to insert, maybe you need to update, maybe you need to delete as part of the data migration with AWS Redshift, and that's going to be no problem. Those commands are going to work just great. And once again, they are the recommended commands that you would utilize in order to take those kinds of actions. But then there is the database migration tool. Now, we've covered the database migration tool in plenty of videos for you here at Pluralsight. If you want to go deep into DMS, by all means, do that with the great DMS training that we have here. But what I wanted to talk about with DMS was just a couple of really Redshift specific things that are exciting. For instance, there's the Snowball Edge product. Remember what Snowball Edge is? It is one of those containers filled with all this rich technology goodness inside, like storage and compute and database services. Yeah, it's got all of this AWS technology in it, and it sits at the edge of your data center, and it helps in a big way with migrations, but it also has the ability to do processing. So you will have environments where the Snowball Edge device is doing manipulation, perhaps, of data, and then sending that data into a VPN up to the AWS cloud. So really consider that option, how powerful that would be, integrating DMS with Snowball Edge. And something else to consider when it comes to AWS DMS and Redshift is that, let's face it, this is by far going to give us the most power, the most flexibility. You're going to have all kinds of options when it comes to sources that you're pulling data from, and DMS can give you all kinds of manipulations of that data as you're doing the transfer. Remember though, DMS is not for the faint of heart. This is something that is going to need to be worked on in and of itself. We build an EC2 instance, which is called the replication instance. So there is a lot of administrative overhead to this process, but for those that need this type of flexibility and sophistication, AWS DMS is a big deal. If you were to search on the internet search in Google for AWS DMS, data migrations, you're going to find expert blog after expert blog that are really great reads on how enterprises are utilizing DMS in conjunction with Redshift, and you'll really, really be impressed. Remember, one of the things that's interesting about DMS is that it often does not go away. So we might have DMS just resident permanently, and it is consistently and without fail migrating data that is maybe being generated in one location up to Redshift for storage and analysis. So really cool. Finally, another tool that doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, with other database services, but again, in Redshift, it's really exaggerated the importance of it. It's the schema conversion tool of AWS. So if you have, all this data and you've got it in Microsoft SQL Server and you're like, oh my goodness, we need to get this into a different format and we need to get this parked up into Redshift, no problem for something like the schema conversion tool. And where the Amazon folks really want you to be aware is that it can do schema conversions from data warehouse to data warehouse. This does lead me to believe that the controversy about how Redshift got its name really is Redshift, shifting away from Oracle. We know Oracle's color is red, Redshift. There's another school of thought about how the name came about, and it has to do with astronomy, I believe. But I'm kind of thinking, especially the way they tout engine-to-engine schema conversion tool type environments, I'm thinking it's Redshift as a clever way to say you're going to move away from Oracle. Wow. All right, well, the schema conversion tool, yeah, it's a big time important tool when it comes to Redshift, because think about it, we are going to have all this various data in all these various formats, and we're going to want to get that into Redshift. And if the schema conversion tool isn't cool enough in and of itself, it has data extraction agents that you can use with it. And these are going to allow you to do some of the conversion stuff not in the cloud. So you could be on-prem, you could be in your own private data center, and you could be doing schema conversion tool tasks as part of the workload. And if that's not enough, the data extraction agents can even help you automate the steps of DMS. So it's no surprise that AWS's schema conversion tool is tied tightly and works great with the data migration service of AWS. So as promised, let's have a discussion about the actual execution and validation of the migrations. There's some important topics here for us to consider. Let's think about the execution of these data migrations, and one of the big things that we need to consider is downtime constraints. So what is going to be required downtimes as we're doing these data migrations? And we can obviously set up maintenance windows, and these maintenance windows are going to be critical for us to be able to move key pieces of data without causing disruption for our end users. But what's interesting about this is, obviously we're going to be able to go in and create such maintenance windows for database migration tasks, but I need you to be aware of the fact that AWS themselves, they're going to be taking your Redshift offline in order to attend to maintenance they must do in maintenance windows. In fact, we need to take a quick look at that inside the Redshift interface. So let's go ahead and drill into our cluster, and when we do so, notice there is this maintenance and monitoring tab. I love it. There's a tool that we can use to get recommendations on cost savings. You got to love that. The alarms feature, obviously powered by CloudWatch. But look at this maintenance area right here. So it's giving us our current cluster version, letting us know that we're up to date, that we have set the cluster so that the version upgrades by AWS can take place. And notice there's the maintenance track of current that we are on. So there's different maintenance tracks you can set up. But this is the really interesting thing. There's a maintenance window that they have set up for us. It's every Saturday from 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And you can see on the particular day I'm recording this, because we have a next scheduled maintenance coming up in 4 days. Now, if you were running some kind of all-weekend project, you would definitely want to come in here and you would want to defer the maintenance. So we would set this to enabled, and then we would indicate the time frame for the deferral. So this is very, very wonderful that they're doing this maintenance window for us regarding the AWS Redshift service itself and our implementation, but it's also critical, of course, that we have control over it, and we can tell AWS, do not render my cluster inaccessible on Saturday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. as you do your maintenance. Now, if you are doing data migrations through a restoration of backed up data, so you have this huge backup, you're going to restore it to AWS Redshift. The big thing I want you to watch out for here, of course, is big gaps in the data. So you may have done your backup and then there was some big data dump into the database, and then you restore from the backup, and of course you didn't catch a whole bunch of the data. So you'll want to be very, very cognizant of that as you are doing those style of database migrations. And then the other thing is obviously speed. So it can be really shocking sometimes, right? When you realize, oh my gosh, this is going to take 3 days. So the migration is executing and you realize, wow, this is really going to take some time. Remember, there is a general rule of thumb here, a general best practice, and that is, of course, that you want to push to the use of AWS services whenever possible. Not necessarily because, we want to support AWS and everything they do. No, it's because of the optimal speeds. A great example is S3. We know that even on the lowest possible tier of AWS 3, where we would get the worst possible performance, it ends up working out great as far as a data repository that can feed Redshift, because Amazon, of course, can really optimize things between those different services when they are transferring their information. Now, a great product that you need to be aware of that you can utilize both to execute and to validate that the data migration went beautifully is AWS Glue. What AWS Glue is doing is it is taking maybe just grossly unstructured, just data sets that you were really stressed about because they weren't in the right schema, they weren't in any kind of format that you wanted, and AWS Glue can crawl that stuff and it can transform that data for you. So as you might guess, AWS Glue often ties in for utilization with the database migration services because it can clean up your data and make great sense of it for you, and then it can work with the database migration service to get it into Redshift where you need it. And not only does it work on the data itself, but it becomes a nice catalog of metadata for you, which of course is data about your data. So it's taking care of that for us as well. It also can provide additional runtime metrics about your overall AWS Redshift implementation. And finally, AWS Glue is so intelligent and so powerful that it has the ability to auto-scale the resources it needs to do its work. So it's going to dynamically create additional resources when needed. And as you might guess, it can spin those down, delete those resources when you have small jobs that it's participating in and it doesn't need additional resources. It is like many AWS services, you're going to find that Amazon Redshift is not automatic when it comes to management and optimization. Now, also like many other AWS services, there is going to be a lot that AWS is going to be doing for us behind the scenes that we don't have to worry about. So there is a mix here of things that we're going to be doing and things that the overall architecture of AWS will do for us, and we'll be stepping through these in this very important module. Now, we will go ahead and begin by taking a look at what maintenance tasks you really want to be considering. And then we'll also discuss how you could manage overall operations in Redshift. And then, of course, everybody's favorite concept, let's make sure our data warehouse, no matter how big, no matter how diverse the data in it, no matter the approach that we've taken, what can we do to get the very best performance out of the AWS Redshift? Carve Rock Fitness has certainly experienced the importance of this. Initially, it was deploying testing, and then they fell in love with AWS Redshift. And then sure enough, the more they started to call upon it in data analytics, and the more they were just thrilled with the information they were getting out of this important AWS service, they realized we want it to work better and better and better. And big kudos to the IT team at Carve Rock Fitness, because they have always had an eye on proactive management in order to head off problems, and much of what we're going to be talking about in this module really helps with that proactive approach. So a clear question that we need to take head on is, what is it that we are going to be needing to do from a maintenance task perspective? And the great news is, we got to remember, this is a shared effort. We talk about the shared responsibility model coming up in a module where we tackle security, but there's also kind of a shared maintenance model here, isn't there? In fact, if we dig into the cluster and we go to the maintenance and monitoring area, I apologize that this is something that's going to come up quite a bit, but there is this maintenance area that we see, and notice that every Saturday from 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. right now, there is this maintenance window where our Redshift implementation is actually going to be unavailable, and the AWS team is going to be taking a look at, have we made any boneheaded, have we made any just ludicrous configurations that is putting us at risk? Is there any inherent vulnerabilities inside of Redshift? And they're going to be taking care of this. Now notice our settings here that can be edited once your cluster is fully online, and mine is not right now, but once you're completely resumed, if you've just paused like I did, you can come in here and edit this, and notice, would you allow them on your behalf to go in and do this major version upgrade? We can't manually do it ourselves. They do this, but notice that, you know, this is a big deal. We're at